February 2024. I'm Councillor Moki Khan and I shall be chairing this meeting. This meeting has been held in person with some councillors joining. Okay, I'll start again. Retake.
Okay, well, we're happy to wait a minute, are we?
Yeah,
Is that okay, Chair?
that's fine. Just let us know.
Okay, we have silence.
Silence, please. Are you ready, Bertie? Okay, go live. Sorry for the slight delay. We just had a couple of technical issues, but we're back online. Welcome to the Scrutiny Committee meeting of South Oxfordshire District Council on Tuesday, the 6th of February, 2024. I'm Councillor Moki Khan and I shall be chairing this meeting. This meeting has been held in person with some councillors and officers joining remotely. For those councillors not here in person, you are permitted to speak, but not to vote on any items on the agenda. I'm just going to quickly go through a few housekeeping points and announcements. Evacuation procedure. In the event of an emergency, please evacuate the building by the nearest exit and assemble at the front of the building. There are no fire alarms scheduled for this evening. Any councillor wishing to speak is asked to indicate their wish by alerting me or officers by raising their hand. This is for both in person and those joining remotely. If you are joining remotely, please turn off your camera until I ask you to speak. I ask all committee members to listen to all debate and let councillors and officers speak without interruption. Please can I ask everyone to turn off their mobile phones or at least put them silent, please. The meeting is being recorded and will be available on the council's YouTube channel. Just in terms of procedure, for each agenda item, the committee will be asked to note, accept the recommendations or provide a new recommendation or a motion. We will vote after we've had the report introduced, at time for questions and debate. I will need a proposer and a seconder for every vote that we have. Indeed, can we have the roll call of councillors and officers before I start the agenda? Thank you.
Okay, firstly, we've had apologies from Councillor Ken Arlett. And I'll just go through the roll call. So we have Councillor Moki Khan.
Present.
Councillor David Turner.
Present.
Councillor Joe Robb.
Present.
Councillor Catherine Keats-Rohan.
Present.
Councillor Tony Morgan.
Present.
Councillor Lee Morlands.
Present in the room.
Councillor James Barlow.
Present.
And Councillor Kate Gregory. Present. If you want me to just mention the officers, we have myself from Democratic Services. We have Adriana Partridge, who's the scrutiny lead. We have Simon Hewings, who's head of finance. And also we have many officers online who will probably introduce themselves when we get to the agenda items.
Thank you very much, Candida. Thank you. I'll go on to the next, that's the first item. And the second item is urgent business and chair's announcements. I'm just going to say, I know that some committee members feel that we have a lot on the agenda, but I'm very keen to get through this agenda tonight because these are all important items and we need to give feedback to the Cabinet. and I don't really want to delay any progress because our next scrutiny meeting isn't until May the 13th. And if required, as I said, I will extend the time of this meeting. So I want to get through as much as we can. Just to save time, can I please ask committee members not to repeat any points that have already been made? That will save a lot of time. So thank you for that. I will now go on to declaration of interest. Do any councillors have any declaration of interest, pecuniary interest or registrable interest that may conflict with any items on the agenda? I see none. Thank you. The next item is number 4, which is the minutes of the meeting held on the 6th of December. What I'm going to do is, it's on pages 4 to 8. I will just quickly page through them and just for you to say if there's any comments or if you want to make any changes. So page 1.
Page 4.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I've got this one.
Yeah. So there's a typo on point 25 on the first line.
Yeah, okay. If I just mention, thank you for spotting that, and I'll make that amendment.
Okay, thank you. And then that was on page 2, well, page 5 on the agenda paper. Page 6. Page 7. And finally, page 8. I see none. So apart from that small minor typo, are committee members happy to approve those minutes? I'm happy to propose. No seconder. Thank you, Councillor Morgan. All in favour?
So I was online on that occasion. Can I vote or not?
Yeah, that's fine.
That's fine.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's been passed. Thank you very much. I will sign that at the end of the meeting. The next item is item 5, which is the work schedule and dates for our South Committee meetings, and that's on pages 9 to 10. So, Canadina, do you want to quickly just introduce that, and then we'll talk about the schedule?
Okay. James, did you want to? You raised a query, didn't you? Did you want to ask that, and then I could answer in that way? Okay.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I was interested in some of the things that are on there, but some things that aren't on there. For example, we talked last time about procurement strategy in terms of the deployment of that and whether that could come on. I was curious about the process by which we can put things on and how we decide what comes to South Scrutiny as opposed to joint scrutiny and what the part is that we play in that.
Okay. Well, I'm after this run of scrutiny meetings. I was planning on reissuing a February version of the work programmes, so I will be putting updates in there. And the procedure normally is that the chairs and the vice chairs have a work programming meeting where things get added on, and also just asking officers whether something's feasible and timings, etc. At that point, usually that is where it's decided whether something's more suitable for separate scrutinies or the joint scrutinies. So if you have any ideas, if you could email them to the chair and the vice chair and copy me in, and then I'll try and put them all together, because I'm aware, obviously, it doesn't look, the work programme is looking a bit thin, so we need people's ideas, and then we need to kind of find out what we're able to do and when. And if Adriana wanted to add anything about that.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, thank you, Councillor Bala, for that. We'll make a note of that and obviously try and schedule it in. And obviously, after speaking to the relevant officers, plan that in and see when it can be put together. Is there any other comments or questions, Councillor Rob?
Thank you, Chair. Just picking up on that point, I would like to see Councillor Powell, officers, if they have capacity to do so, and possibly Councillor Barker, come to scrutiny to talk about Didcot Gateway. It's been quite a long time since we've had any analysis of that project. It's a £25 million project that appears in our budget, the biggest ever capital item of capital expenditure in the history of this council, I think. So I think it's important that we have an ongoing eye on that particular project.
I agree with the Councillor Rob. So again, we'll put that onto the schedule and see how we can plan that in, and then call the relevant officers and cabinet members to attend. Councillor Rawlins, that's your hand up.
Yeah, a couple of points. We'll have more discussion on it as we go through the meeting, but I think we might need a major meeting dedicated to Cornerstone to give it proper to address it properly, because I think there's going to be a lot that comes out in the discussion that means, yes, we need to get on with it, but yes, there's a lot more to think about and to understand about it. Personally, I'm concerned that the 20th may be a tad overburdened. I think, again, the Didcot Garden Town thing is pretty huge item, deserves some proper consideration. And then I'm assuming that we're going to be looking at an awful lot of positive suggestions under the transformation programme. So I'm inclined to think that we might be getting a multi-100-page report again, and that the subjects won't be done justice to if we put them in the same meeting. And if we sincerely believe that scrutiny is worth doing, it's worth doing properly. In terms of things that we perhaps ought to consider in future, I think housing mix issues are also an appropriate thing to be thinking about, and how we got to here.
Thank you for those comments, Councillor Rawlings. All noted, and I'm sure we can decide on that once we receive the actual reports. No, scrutiny is about challenging and being robust and asking the right questions. So, we never want to skip over anything, but we also want to make sure we progress things as well.
Of course.
Any other questions or comments? I see none. So, Candida, what we'll do, we'll note the additional comments that councillors have made, and then when we do a planning meeting, we'll just try and put these in. Okay, thank
I'll
you.
draft up a work programme for approval, so I'll take on board all your comments.
Thank you. Committee members happy to note that and move on to the next item? Thank you. Moving on. The next item is public participation, and I've been notified we do have one speaker who's registered. Do we have that? It's Mr. Salmons?
Yes, I'm on the line.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. You've got 3 minutes to speak. Please introduce yourself and please tell the committee members what item you're speaking to.
Yeah, thank you. I'm John Salmons. I'm a resident of Didcot, resident of South Oxfordshire. Wanted to comment on agenda item 7, the budget item. It will probably be no surprise to some of you in the room what specifically I wanted to comment on, which is regarding an item in Appendix D3 attached to the budget item, which sets out the capital growth bids, including a proposal for further spend on a new grounds maintenance hub. If I've understood correctly, the £28,000 proposed spend is in addition to the £44,000 approved in last year's budget for this scheme, as set out in Appendix D2. And whilst relatively small, this spend raises a lot of questions. For example, what kind of grounds maintenance hub will the taxpayers of South Oxfordshire get for a total capital spend of £72,000? Will it be a scale model made out of Lego? The answer is presumably that they won't get a grounds maintenance hub at all. Vale of White Horse, who are contributing the vast majority of the £330,000 combined budget for this scheme, will presumably have ownership of the facility. Which begs the question why South Oxfordshire is contributing any capital at all. Should it not merely contribute to the running costs of the facility via some form of lease agreement? With no revenue consequences identified for either council, this is presumably a proposal to own a site rather than rent one. Last year, the proposal was to skip the crucial step of buying a suitable industrial site and instead dump this depot in Great Western Park in place of the Wildflower Meadow residents were promised when they purchased their homes. But even then, when the land was essentially free, the budget for the scheme was £200,000. Now, I'm no property development professional, but I'm struggling to see how an additional £130,000 is suddenly going to enable the councils to buy a suitable industrial site for this industrial use. And I can't help but notice that officers and councillors, despite countless opportunities, this evening being yet another, still refuse to reassure the residents of Great Western Park that their green space is no longer under threat by this scheme. Which brings us to the million-dollar question. Where will this grounds maintenance hub be located? At Vale Scrutiny last night, it was suggested the budget for this scheme is not location specific. that it is a generic cost for building a grounds maintenance depot.
30 seconds
But it
left.
certainly seems to me the amount being budgeted suggests the councils are still cutting corners on this scheme and still banking on dumping this depot somewhere they shouldn't. And in any event, how can councillors possibly sign off such an oddly specific budget for a mysterious scheme to develop an undisclosed site? So many questions, so much scrutiny required. The only
Mr.
question
Salmons,
left
can I
to
just ask
us
you to wrap
is
up,
whether
please?
this scrutiny committee is brave enough to ask these important questions on behalf of residents. Thank you.
Mr. Salmons, thank you for that, and thank you for joining the meeting and for your questions and statements. You obviously made quite a few points there, and I think it would be unfair to ask the cabinet member to respond on that. So what I'm going to ask you to do is if you can email your questions and what you just said, and we will send you a written response.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Salmon. I don't believe we have anyone else who's registered. Okay, thank you. Move on to item 7, which is the budget setting for 2024 to 25. And I will ask Councillor Peter Paul Barker and also Simon Hewings to introduce the report. Simon Hewings is our Head of Finance. And we've also got Councillor David Rowan joining as well.
I start.
Please do, Councillor Barker.
Well, I won't take up the committee's time with a long speech, just to quickly introduce the paper and speak to some of the political considerations that underlie the budget. I'll let Simon deal with the procedural matters of how the budget was approached in terms of revenue changes made to the structure of the capital programme and so on. So in terms of the politics behind it, this budget is very much a continuity budget where our objective has been, and successful in this case, to preserve all of the services that the council currently offers, both in terms of the statutory as well as the discretionary services at the level of quality that's already there, and where possible to continue to improve those. And that was a significant challenge this year because of the huge cost pressures that, well, you can see from the papers, SODC is clearly under, and of course we know from the news, all councils are under extreme cost pressure. The papers have only been finalised quite recently because there have been some very late decisions from government in particular, but I'll go into detail on the government funding if that's of interest to the committee. But essentially, the government funding is what the government currently tries to do is to, in their statements, is to maintain core council funding. But unfortunately for us, what they do, a bit of a sleight of hand there, is they include an assumption not only that we will raise council tax by the maximum that we are allowed, but they also take into account all the new houses that we've built in the period and all the council tax from those houses, and they deduct that from what they call their, maintenance of council core funding, or as that effect. So we're at a disadvantage essentially by building houses, which is supposedly what the government wants councils to do, but then it penalises councils that actually do it. But anyway, that's where we are, and glad to say that services, we have been able to maintain services, and we're also proposing to introduce some additional support for the arts through the budget process, which happy to cover as we go through the discussion tonight.
Thank you. Any other additions from you, Simon or Councillor Rowan?
If I just say a couple of sentences. When I was doing my accountancy training, we were told the budget is the financial expression of a plan. So I just wanted to make a point that we don't do the finances in isolation. This is built on our corporate plan, the one that is currently in place. Later in this meeting, we'll be discussing the process for updating that. But what this does is set aside the financial resources, but also reflects what we think will happen as a result of that corporate plan. In particular, within our corporate plan, we talk about financial sustainability. And the bottom line of this plan has a deficit, but it's so much smaller. It's about half what was in the MTFP for this year when we set the budget last year. So it's a reflection of the work that's been done over the last 4 years, in particular the transformation work, that's got us into a more sustainable financial position. Obviously, there is so much uncertainty in the world, and in the world of local authority finances in particular, not least of which is a general election coming up at some point, and uncertainty about what the policies will be of the new government. I suspect that it won't be the top of their agenda and if the words Royal Commission are mentioned, we'll all know that it can take about 4 or 5 years before we actually know what the next step will be. But yeah, that's the context in which we're producing. There shouldn't be any major surprises in the budget because it's the resources to do what we've said we've been doing for the last 4 years.
Thank you very much for that. Thank you for introducing the report. Before I ask committee members to ask for questions, when you do ask for a question, please do state what page and what paragraph number it is, just because it makes things a little bit easier for everyone to follow. And also because these are quite long reports, so it could do that for all the reports. So we'll have some questions and then debate, and then we'll go vote on the recommendation. So any questions? Councillor Morgan?
I've got about 7 questions. Do you want me to go through them one at a time?
You can do a couple, and then I'll let others speak, and then I'll come back to you.
Yeah. So the first one is on the additional waste costs, which if we look on page 20, so if we look at the items in Appendix A2, so I'm looking at lines 19, 20, 21, 22, 26, 27 and 28.
Mm-hmm.
By my reckoning, that's about 200k of additional costs for this every year. I put all those together. Just wondering if we think that's the right number. So I'm looking at the additional resource or waste tender retender, the additional waste technical officers, the additional project officers, 26, and then also in lines 26, 27, sorry, 26, 27, and 28 are on Appendix A4. So between those, there's about 200k of additional costs. I'm just wondering if we think that is the right number.
Well, there's a real mixture here. I mean, in A2, which is the opening budget adjustments, they're actually figures being removed. But there's a significant amount of additional waste contract costs. Yeah, absolutely. Simon, do you want to direct us to the places in the paper?
Yeah. So as has just been mentioned, the items referred to in Appendix A2 are actually taking money out of the budget that was in for one-off support towards waste contract work. However, what's actually happened in Appendix A4 is some of those officers have been put back in. So those officers were originally in to support work on what we thought was originally going to be a retendering exercise, but became an extension exercise. We'll now need to do a retendering exercise for 2026. So those officers have been, or not necessarily those officers, but that level of support is needed to support the next stage of the contract negotiation.
So that's page 25.
So that's that was on page 20 in terms of the people coming out.
Yeah.
In terms of the staffing being put back in, there is row 26 and row 27.
Yeah.
Row 26 actually reflects the fact that what we thought was an initial one-off support person is actually proving valuable, and because waste constantly changes, the environment around waste constantly changes in terms of the operating environment, and even when we retender, the service is likely to change over that period or whatever the service looks like. So that's been made permanent. Row 27 and row 28 are the one-off support for that retendering.
And just on that page, row 24 is, the very large number is the increase in the contract costs.
Yeah.
Due to inflation, everything else, the fact that contract came to an end has now been extended for 2 years and so on.
And I'd probably just stress that the waste contract is the council's biggest single contract it's a, I think it's something like £6 million. And it's one of the most public facing services. So I think being resourced up to make sure that tendering is appropriate is tendering is effective is appropriate.
Councillor Owen, you want to come back?
I don't know if the committee would like me to give a bit of context, because people who've been around for a while would know why this was all delayed, but I don't know if many people do.
If you can quickly give us a summary.
We expected our contract with BIFA was coming to an end. We expected to retender for a replacement contract. That was dependent on the new conditions that the government was going to set in the Environment Act. The government didn't. When the Environment Act went through, but there were statutory instruments that had to say what the standards were going to be for waste collection going forward. Those were never published. And so we were in the position of, we couldn't go out to tender for a contract to deliver something that the government might move the goalposts on. And so we issued a new 2-year contract with BIFA, essentially at the same standard levels. But obviously, because they're recovering money over a shorter period of time, the prices went up. So that's the sort of context that we're in. After that 2 years, we're hoping that all the requirements will then be in place and we can go out to tender for the next however many years. The previous one was 7 years contract, in the knowledge of this is what the service level has to be. For example, what are the recycling requirements? Is the government going to set minimum levels? We know they are, but what are they? So that's why it's all been strung out for a lot longer than we would have liked. But it's, I would say, down to government inaction.
Okay, well, thank you for the background on that, Councillor Owen. Councillor Ward, did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Do you have a second question, please?
Yeah, so the second question is a general one about homelessness. So just as an aside, I am a member of the Finance Committee on Dickory Town Council, and the local CAB came and did a presentation recently where actually the biggest problem they're expecting this year is a significant increase in homelessness. So the question relates to item 12 on page 29 and the item on page 37 where the current homelessness prevention ends in the current year, whether actually we think that with the expected increase in homelessness over the next couple of years, actually we have enough money in that to deal with that.
So you're looking at page 29, item 12.
Yeah, it was just a general item 12, whether we're comfortable that's enough, bearing in mind the problems that might be expected over the next few years.
Well, it's not our own budget, that's the government grant funding, and that flexes, with.
Sorry, I didn't understand.
We can bring that in as well.
Yeah, I was just going to say, yeah, the homelessness prevention grant is something, and Andrew Busby's area of work is something that we get from government, and as you can see, there has been somewhat of an increase built in. I think ultimately there is quite a lot of pressure on government because, as you may be aware, lots of local authorities are literally getting close to bankruptcy as a result of temporary accommodation costs. So I personally want to believe the government are going to increase it, but we don't know. But it is external funding, and we also get some money back for temporary accommodation, but the gap between what it actually costs and what we get from government is getting wider as we have an increase in the need and the demand for the service. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I'll ask other committee members for any other questions. Councillor Rawlings, then Turner, then I'll come back to you, Councillor Morgan.
If I look on Appendix A2, there's a line there talking about point 30, I think, talking about additional costs of £500,000 a year in relation to our community hub, activity grants, and staffing for corporate plan priorities. And I'd just like to hear a little bit more about what actually is included in there. It's not that I think it's wrong or anything. I'm just trying to understand this.
Yeah, sorry, this is the entry that has effectively come out of the budget from 25-26 onwards, because that's the point at which we've incorporated this into a business as usual for the council, making the community hub team a permanent team.
Yeah, so it's extending it into the future.
It's coming out as a line item because it's now in the rest of the revenue budget as business as usual.
Okay, all right, thank you. A4, point 14 was about, I understand now, the Didcot community centres, and I just would question that going forwards. At some point we need to see those things become part of their local communities, I would suggest, where they can, I think, build activity and income better than the district council probably can. And it's just a transition from the proper S106 process, which we've taken forward and taken them in through their initial existence. But I think at some point in the future, sensibly, they would be part of the community provision in the same way that village halls and town halls and facilities generally are. And in that way, they get more local focus, I think, which helps to provide their income stream. So it was just a comment. If I look
Just to say on that, I think that's a very useful comment for Scrutiny to give.
Thank you
for that. Councillor Rawlings, I'll come back. I go to Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Chair. I've cast in my mind back to the 2021 budget, when we found ourselves in a situation, the council spending £3 million a year more than it was taken in revenue. And we took £2 million out of the budget, and we created a transition fund for all of the savings. Could you give some examples of some of the savings we've made through that transition fund?
Yes, I mean and also I think it says in the papers here that transformation programme is also being effectively made permanent now. That's going to be an ongoing programme within the council to constantly find ways, to operate still provide high quality services, but in the best way possible. Investors say this is classic example. And I think the examples that we've seen to date from that programme, a lot of them are around IT system replacements. To many cases where departments were running with extremely old systems, causing lots of additional costs, and those are progressively being replaced. I think we've also spoken a lot about council offices, and I'm sure it will come into play again later during this meeting, and Joe's raised the question earlier. And a lot of work was done there as well in terms of looking at the feasibility of moving out to Milton Park. That saved a huge amount of money. Obviously being placed here temporarily has helped a lot, but doesn't solve the permanent situation, hence needing to continue to work on that. David, you probably answer all right.
Yeah, a couple of specifics. One is we're going to be looking later at reports that we commissioned on Cornerstone. Cornerstone costs us a lot of money each year, and so doing a study into how we can reduce that is an invest to save. And I think the gold star in our transformation programme is that we recruited someone to fill in grant applications, because the way that the government operates is it's tended to reduce the amount of core funding that it gives to councils, but to have specific programmes which councils are invited to bid for. And it was always a frustration when I was cabinet member for responsible for housing, that there were lots of funds that were available, but nobody had the time to do it. And so employing somebody who not only that was their job to fill in application forms, but also they had that skill, because taking that as an example, being a housing manager is one skill. Writing an application to government to fund a particular programme is a different skill. So that person, I don't have the figure. I stopped counting when he was being brought in, I think 10 times as much as it cost. But yeah, when I worked for a charity, we used to say fundraisers, that's been 4 times. He brought in a lot more. So that was an obvious piece of, and you won't see one line for that, but you'll see lots of fully funded or part funded programs throughout that are funded from government funds.
All right, thank you for that. Councillor Tun, do you have any?
Well, just a comment on that. The medium-term financial plan still shows about £13 million from reserves over 5 years, which, so we're not out of the woods yet. We still have to look for more savings and so forth. One idea for savings, my second question, Chair.
Okay, you can get to the question.
Several years ago, we paid upfront £5 million into the pension fund, which is administered by the county council still, I believe, for us. And that's produced savings further down the line. Have we considered that?
I mean, we've made 2 contributions of £5 million to the pension fund. We haven't done, and they've followed the 3 yearly triennial revaluation of the pension fund and came out of discussions with OCC on whether an investment was a good idea. The last 2 revaluations, we've actually had money in the budget to make a potential contribution. The discussions with OCC didn't indicate it would be as good an investment as had previously been made.
Okay.
So we as recently as last year, we had the same conversation again. In the current climate, we've taken that money, the potential to put that money in out of the budget, because it's at least 3 years again before we can make that decision again. But an opportunity to do that clearly remains at any revaluation stage. But as I said, the last 2 times we've had a revaluation, we've concluded the answer was no.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Simon.
I'm going to next go to Councillor Morgan, then Councillor Rob, and Councillor Bollard. So you had your hand up. You kindly sent some questions in advance, so that's good. And then I'll go back to you, Councillor Morgan. So, Councillor.
Quite happy for Councillor Bollard to go ahead and make we'll have my turn.
Okay. Very kindly. Councillor Rob.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much for this detailed analysis. I've wanted, and congratulations also on really successfully making these savings that have meant that we've literally halved, I think, the draw on our reserves this year compared with last year's predictions. I wanted to talk very quickly about Gateway. That item is £24.682 million in the budget, £7 million in February next year, and then 24-25, and then 16 million in 25-26. We had a discussion earlier about this, but I think to the public it would be useful to hear some more detail about how that draw on our reserves will impact revenues from our reserves, given that we are relying largely on revenues from our reserves to fund our deficit, to balance our budget.
Yes, I mean the item obviously is effectively a standing item following council's vote a few years ago, but it's effectively a holding item until the detail is available of what that scheme in detail will look like when it actually all starts, because all these kind of borrowing decisions around funding of schemes will depend very much on the timing. And so although there's a provisional capital programme obviously in here, I regard it very much as just an indication of how it could be funded. It's not a decision that's being made now as to how it will be funded. That decision will be made at the time. Simon, do you want to add anything on the detail behind that?
I mean, I suppose just first of all, just to clarify, so that the numbers shown on page 35 are the latest indicative view of when the money will be spent, subject to satisfactory, business case and due diligence, etc., and a final go decision on the project. The assumption is made here that the building is funded through the combination of using our own money and borrowing. So if we use our own money, we won't clearly have a borrowing cost, but we would lose the income from the interest income associated with that balance. However, the assumption in the budget, of course, is that is offset by rental income as the part of the building will be available to tenants. If we do borrowing as well, then again there is an assumption of a borrowing cost in the medium-term financial plan. Not just for this project, we need to borrow more widely. But I think the key point, as has just been said, I think at the point at which we have a final go no-go decision, we can actually make definitive decisions about the best funding mechanism for that and what its impact on the council is. At the moment, we can estimate, but we can't be certain.
Thank you, Simon. I have a quick follow-up question.
Yes, please do.
FOP, Future Oxfordshire Partnership, we spend £94,000 to support the work done by the Future Oxfordshire Partnership. And we have projected an additional £100,000 a year of additional spend to support our own staff and to enable our own staff to support the work of the Future Oxfordshire Partnership. I just wanted to raise that because there are three of us sitting here this evening who also sit on the FOP scrutiny panel. And we have observed with some concern what could be deemed to be at best some duplication work being done by FOP, including on housing, which is not within FOP's jurisdiction, and at worst, mission creep, where we are talking about FOP expanding its remit quite dramatically and in a way that I don't think anyone necessarily anticipated or wants to see. So I just wanted to raise that really and ask, are we really going to be spending nearly £200,000 a year on FOP, and what sort of measures to ensure that they're accountable to us and to our residents are being undertaken?
Yeah, I'll let David come in on this. He's heavily involved with FOP, but the budget gives an indication of what those costs would be if we continued as we are now.
If we can focus on the answer on the finance element rather than the political side, please.
Yeah. There are essentially two sets of costs for FOP. Originally, FOP was part of the Oxfordshire Growth Deal, and there is funding for the officer corps of FOP as part of that grant, and that's the core work of FOP. And in our budget, where it's been sort of subsumed within other things. What we've identified more recently is that our officers are having to spend more time on supporting the subsidiary elements of FOP. So not the main meetings where we look at the growth deal activity, but the subgroups that look at infrastructure, planning, environment. Our approach to that is, first of all, identifying that cost, because it's a significant cost that every time I go into an environment advisory group, I have to be advised by Suzanne and by quite often our climate team do a lot of work on the papers there. The justification for doing that is that sometimes work is better done at county-wide level. And so a lot of the research that we commission for the environment group, for example, is useful for us, for our climate work or for our biodiversity work. And so it's better to commission it as 6 councils rather than 1. There are other elements that we don't think are of as good value. And that's why we've identified out the support for the committees as a particular cost to flag it to you and to ourselves that we need to manage that. So whenever we agree to do an extra piece of work, we're conscious that we're spending money on doing that. So, for example, at the last FOP meeting, there was a question from the public about doing spatial planning for the need to do a spatial planning for Oxfordshire, which is basically Oxfam 2050, which we had decided not to do. So flagging up that we've made decisions about what we will and will not do, and we're allocating money to doing that, but recognising that there is a cost to us all turning up to these meetings.
But these jobs, David, are new. This is new jobs.
Councillor Rawlings.
Sorry, I was just clarifying.
Yes.
That answers my question. Thank
you very much. Councillor Barlow.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like us to talk a little bit about the reserves that we have, please. About understanding what the reserves are reserved for in terms of their purpose. Obviously, we're looking at using some of them over the next few years, and a lot less than we were initially planning to. But I'm interested about how they're held, and what we might be able to use those amounts for if there are certain local infrastructure gaps that we might have identified for from other strategic reviews. For example, the leisure centre's assessment and strategy recommends a skate park in Wallingford, and that's the kind of capital plan that I'm wondering whether it could be possible using these reserves. But I'm asking broadly, that's a specific part of it.
Well, I'll start with sort of an overview, and then I think it could be useful if Simon gives more background as well, because it's a very relevant question. And on page 43, obviously that's the standard report on the intercultural plan, and it shows the general fund balance at the bottom. But that's only one aspect of the reserves, which I think is what you're referring to. The fact that this is one aspect of general fund balance used to rainy day funding essentially. And this year's a good example of a rainy day where there've been a lot of cost pressures, and there is a drain on reserves. But then there's also the additional 50 million held in long-term reserves. Important question, and I'll let Simon go into a bit more detail.
So yes, I mean, in terms of page 43, Appendix F, the MTFP, there's three specific reserve balances mentioned there. One is a general fund balance, as has just been described. There's also earmarked reserves, and they're allocated for specific purposes, but they're all those are revenue in nature. I'll come back to that in a minute, but where I've said that. And then there's capital receipts, which is the existing balance capital receipts. The sort of things you're describing would be capital in nature, I think, as infrastructure. I think there are other pots of money, if you like, that aren't on here, because this is a revenue MTFP when we look at Appendix F. For example, SIL, potential Section 106 contributions could fund those activities. So it might be worth in thinking of the sort of schemes you're talking, the specific scheme you talked about. It's probably worth raising that for consideration by, in the first instance, the SIL working group, for example. I don't know whether the parish council would have its own SIL that it could use for that purpose as well. So that's probably an avenue to explore for specifically on infrastructure.
And that, can I come back on that?
Yes, I'll let you have another question.
So that was the specific, and I appreciate what you're saying there. I was thinking more broadly, if we have got this money available to us and there are bigger gaps that we might see as a council that we'd like to support, that maybe discretionary funding, I'm wondering what opportunity we have to discuss how we choose our reserve policy.
So, I mean, in terms of the reserve policy, I mean, again, I think that in terms of infrastructure, you're talking about capital rather than revenue. So, as we've talked about earlier on, there is the ring fence balance, the 50 million, although a lot of that is invested or is intended to be invested. But I think we probably want to understand the ideas around that, because clearly that investment is helping support the revenue account. It's earning interest that's keeping services going. So I think we'd need to understand. It's probably not a discussion for this budget round, but it's probably a longer term discussion about some of the priorities you're thinking about, the best way we can fund them, or what impact funding them would have on the revenue budget.
Okay, thank you. So that's coming through the corporate plan could be really helpful with that.
I see that Councillor Ruan wants to come in.
Yeah, that's the point I'm making. We're about to do a corporate plan, so it's not a question for now. It is a question, but it's not a question for now. Until we've done our new corporate plan and have a long-term vision as to what it is we want to do, then we can revisit what our reserves policy is and our investment policy. But it's at this stage, what we're presenting is a revenue budget for the next year, and it's based on what our current policies are.
I know, Councillor Barlow, you've got a few more questions, but I'll come back to you.
Yeah, that's fine.
Councillor Morgan.
So I've got 2 points that relate to the capital programme, sort of related. We've got the drainage works on Vauxhall Manor Park, which are shown as 36k. Which page? Apologies, it's page 36. Page 39. Yep. The drainage works. So item 10 on there, which is shown as 36k. And there's sort of a couple of related questions here, which is 36k for drainage is not a lot of money. So how well are we sure that's scoped correctly? But if we go back to page 36, And the second item, the 2 lines above where it says financing capital, we've got provision of 102k in 25-26 for a pumping station. So the question there was, do we think there might be any savings by doing those both together? Because there are similar but not the same works. And in relation to the pumping station, is there an increased ongoing OPEX cost associated with that once it's done? And if there is that incorporated in the budget somewhere?
So, I mean, obviously, there's a very detailed questions about the scheme itself rather than about the.
So I think the general question was, have we actually considered whether putting some of these purchases together will save us money overall, albeit they appear in different places on the budget? So has that been considered in the budget? And then there's that's the principal question.
Councillor Barker, if and it's to all members here, if there's a question you can't answer or you want time, I'm happy for written responses to be circulated afterwards.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea on this one. And just to comment as well, if we're looking at page 39, item 10, which is the drainage improvements, this was originally a SIL item on the list of potential SIL projects. It's just dropped out of that because it's not eligible for SIL, and that's why it now appears on that scheme as a capital project, capital growth budget. That doesn't necessarily tell us when the scheme will be done or whether it will be linked to other things, because it's effectively, the growth bid is effectively making that budget then available for officers to work with. Yeah. At which stage they would consider points like the ones that you've raised from an operational point of view, at delivery point.
Does that answer your question?
With probably a bit of detail.
Okay, you can come back. Thank you. And written response, that'd be great. Can I have another question from you?
No,
that's okay. Councillor Rawlings and then Councillor Rob.
Yeah, and if we were to look at the final page 43 of appendix, we've got on line 30, I think there, expected in-year savings that will build from 100 grand a year to 500 grand a year.
No, it's cumulative.
Yeah, so it builds up year by year and makes that impact. We've also got the impact of tax-based growth, which we can see is 3% a year, and probably will have something like a 1% building cost per year coming into the cost base, other things being equal. And then, of course, we've got new contracts coming along, which are not things that we can forecast, but there is a real concern that they may well bring additional costs in. So all I'm saying is that the assumption at the moment is that Adriana and Tim are going to bring forward the transformation changes, and all will be well, and all of these extra costs, which are quite substantial when you rack them up, are going to be addressed and dealt with in that way. And that's going to be a pretty large amount, I would say. I mean, if you said that tax-based growth was worth only 1% of our base budget, that would be of the order of 250 grand a year, and that would build up year on year as the 1% come in. So overall, I think we're looking at quite a big challenge in the cost there, and therefore we're going to have to see some quite
Councillor, can you get to the question?
Yeah, so all I'm doing is flagging that there is a question here, and I think we need to understand more of what it is that transformation is going to be capable of bringing forward, that it can match those substantial sums. Yeah, and that's the essence of the.
Councillor Barker, did you understand the question?
Yeah.
More or less.
Okay, please respond.
I mean, the in-year savings target which is shown there, for sure is challenging, and it's effectively a target that we set in order to be able to focus effort on achieving that. And in reality, of course, it's not really a nice round number like that. It's going to vary greatly from one year to the next, depending on decisions that are made. And equally, we know there are, and I think it's highlighted in the report, a number of contracts coming up for renewal in the MTFP period, which could have a very significant impact on these numbers, which obviously we can't reflect because we don't know yet. All I would say that is with anything like those kind of contracts and those kind of decisions that council will have to make about how to fulfil that service in the future, it's in both directions. It could end up costing a lot more. It could be that a way is found to do it even much better. And so the assumption in the MTFP is to take costs as they are now and to project them forward based on inflationary increases and so forth, and any cost increases that are already known. But it is, the MTFP, I would say, is a challenge to achieve it, even though it shows us taking money from reserves every year in this MTFP period. Nevertheless, it will be very challenging to achieve that if government funding has the profile that it's forecast to have in here, and that's maybe the biggest question of all.
Yeah, no, I mean, I understand there's a huge amount of work gone in here, very pleasing result. I'm just saying that there are also some risks out there, that's all I'm saying, and that we need to understand what it is that transformation can deliver against those big costs.
Councillor Rawlings, do you have another question?
No, that's fine.
Okay. Councillor Rob.
Very quick ones. Page 27, line 43. Additional staffing to support the National Infrastructure Project. What is the National Infrastructure Project?
This one, not one I recognise.
Does someone else want to answer that question?
I can wait for a
Or
response.
do you want a written response?
That's okay.
We'll get a written response.
Yeah, it's fine.
Okay, if you go to the second question.
Second question, I wasn't quite clear following Councillor Rawlinson's question about contracts. How have assumptions been built in around the likelihood of dramatically increased costs under our contracts, which are, SNABA coming to an end? Well, we don't know what will happen to that, SNABA, but waste 2026, leisure 2026. How have assumptions around increased costs been built into the budget there?
So these are the ones that are listed in paragraph 57.
Yeah.
Yeah. So obviously the 5 councils partnership, those costs are quite well understood now, although could still be significant movement, of course. SABA is the car parking services. I mean, in terms of car parking services, waste and leisure, I'll let Simon comment on, what assumptions underlie the numbers in the MTFP in terms of where we are now.
Yeah. And what we know about the additional $1 million a year to extend the BIFA contract.
So in terms of the waste contract extension, that's been built into the budget. The assumption in the budget is those costs continue at that level, but clearly we don't know going forward. In terms of the other contracts, I mean, there are transition costs associated with the 5 councils partnership, and indeed all the contracts there are built into the budget. That's the cost of, officer support or work to work on what the future service provision looks like when the contract comes to an end, be that in-house, be that externalised or some such. But it's actually very difficult to know what those services will cost in the future. And as such, I think this is where that we have a slight change in presentation in the MTFP. I think we've always actually in the context of contract renewals, we've never made an assumption in the MTFP or tried to assume what the future cost will be. We've made the assumption that the cost it carries on as it is. That's our working assumption. However, what I think we're very clear on is I think we've probably reached the maximum our total budget can be, given our likely funding. So whatever the cost of future service provision is, it will lead to decisions about, if it's greater than what's currently in, it will lead to decisions about how we pay for that, because it can't just be added to the budget.
Through you, Chair, is that a standard practice across local authorities in terms of budget setting and assumptions? Is it normal to assume that the cost of contracts will continue much the same?
It's certainly, I mean, I've not particularly looked, unless you've got any certainty of what the contract would be going forward. I'm not sure what number you could build in, would be my guess. It's certainly been the presumption here, in all the time I've been here, and a lot of that, clearly the councils have outsourced a lot of services over time. I think interestingly, there was an assumption, and it's an interesting one to think back on. quite often outsourcing was clearly seen as a way of saving money, and I think that situation has changed. But I think it's very difficult to put a number on that in this budget report. The only thing if I put a number in it, I'd guarantee it was wrong, because I wouldn't know. Is it too high? Is it too low? I don't, and by how much, I don't know. So all we can really do is actually caveat, as we've done in the narrative, that we can't put a figure on that. We've made an assumption, but we will have to manage the outcome of what the real number is when we know what it is.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Ryan, you want to come in?
Yeah, on that, I think there's an assumption around the table that costs are always going to go up. And if I'm given a for example on waste, at the moment, one of the reasons why we are star recyclers is that we just ask our residents to put everything in one bin.
Yeah.
It could be, and what lots of councils do, is they separate it out, and the residents have to separate it out. Sue Cooper talks about you could have one bin for square things and one for round things, which is not as ridiculous as it sounds, because it's bottles and cans in one and paper and cardboard in another. But you could have the residents doing a lot more of the work, which actually means the recycling of it is cheaper. We currently make the decision, or our ancestors made the decision to maximise recycling by making it simple. So it doesn't always go one way. The other thing I would add is that I've moved in a mysterious way and now know what the National Infrastructure Project is, which is EV charging. The government, it was a government scheme which was then devolved down to councils to introduce EV charging.
The wonders of Googling.
Councillor Rob has benefited from this.
Indeed, thank you very much for that. I should declare an interest there. I have an electric car.
It's noted. Councillor Rob, do you have any other questions?
I just wanted to acknowledge the fact that the growth of business rates above the baseline has yielded an additional £779,000. And that, you may recall, those of us who've been here a while will recall that started out because of the work of an individual councillor who identified large businesses that weren't paying rates. And I'm very pleased to see that the consultants who were brought in to keep an eye on our business rates have stayed on and are continuing that work. So I just wanted to acknowledge that as well.
Well, thanks for your statement. I was waiting for a question there.
Are we all happy with that? Yeah.
Very happy.
Yeah,
thank you. Just before I go to Councillor Turner, do any other committee members who haven't spoken want to ask? Councillor Keats Ryan.
This is maybe complete ignorance on my part, so forgive me. How do we come to make savings in housing benefits? This is on page 28.
Yes, I think that's actually, it's not so much a saving as a correction to a previous estimate. So basically, we pay out housing benefit, but we claim subsidy, but the amount of subsidy depends on caseload and lots of other factors. And I think we took a pretty pessimistic view of the likely net result of that equation in the past, and actually we were in a better position than we thought we were. So it's not really it's more an accounting conundrum rather than anything else. But I would say, I mean, if you think it looks a lot of money, don't forget that we probably pay out, well over £20 million in housing benefit a year to get the subsidy back on, which is actually a figure higher than our revenue budget.
Yeah, well, thank you. Yes, just looked a bit sinister given what we know about housing problems, but thank you. Yeah.
Thank you for that. Councillor Turner.
Yes, I'm looking at Appendix D2 on page 36, and I see that for refurbishing Hidmore End and Wallingford cemeteries, there's a budget this year of 34,000, 100,000 for next year. My question is, do we get any revenue back for that? It seems to me to be grossly unfair that we support some communities' cemeteries, but not others in other parishes around the district, and also town councils who are paying. I know my own parish council makes a grant, doesn't cover the cost by any means, but I know it's historic, but is there any way of actually bringing some equity to this situation across the district?
Well, in terms of cemeteries that are no longer in active use, it is simply the case in the way that local authorities are set up that it falls to to us to take them over and to maintain them. Yeah. And in this case, it's a refurb cost, which is like capital.
Sorry, yes, we do have some remnant cemeteries which legally we have to take responsibility. But Kidmore End and Wallingford are, if I could call them, live cemeteries, as in they're currently being used. And I know from Didcot Town Council basically breaks even on running its cemetery by charging burial fees. And whilst I haven't seen it as a separate line in the budget, I would assume that our costs are, I can take away and nugget it, but I assume that our costs are pitched in order to break even on the running of those cemeteries.
And the equity of the situation?
It's life. Yeah, I heard noises of saying life's unfair. Ideally parishes would run the cemeteries. Two of them don't, and so we run them. It's a historical thing. We do periodically ask those two councils if they would like to take it on. I think they take an entirely rational decision that they're quite happy where they are. But
maybe a subject for future scrutiny, Chair.
No, to Councillor Turner.
Just one final question, if I may.
Well, just to add on the cemeteries, I think that the refurb that's talked about here as a capital cost is because the access roads and so on are in a terrible state, and clearly it's important that public access to the cemeteries is possible, and so that's why that cost is in the budget. Whether that's ever recoverable from the are highly doubted.
I'm sure many parishes have done up roads into their cemeteries at their own cost as well. I know mine has. Just one final thing.
Just before we go to your next question, I'm going to take another 5 minutes for questions. So please think of your most crucial, vital question you want to get point, and say to the cabinet members. So please think about that. So, Councillor Turner.
Yes, during the peak of COVID, we administered several government financial schemes on behalf of the government. Have we been fully refunded for that by the government as they promised originally? And I guess that also applies to all the work we did trying to settle refugees, particularly from Ukraine, in our district, in which this council's done a first-class job, I have to say.
Well, certainly when it comes to the costs of the COVID schemes, yes, my understanding of some things is that SLC has been fully refunded for all of that by government. So, I don't have any complaints there from the financial. On the Ukraine scheme, I think maybe Maggie has been.
Yeah, they are fully funded schemes. The funding tariff varies from cohort to cohort, but generally speaking, most of our activities are funded externally.
And is there an audit trail for both of them that we got all that which we spent?
Well, in terms of the refugee schemes, there was a report when we took the decision to pursue the local authority housing fund, which laid out in quite some detail our activities and funding streams. And I remember a spreadsheet, Adriana, that was really, really handy. So we can take this away and send you those. They are, by the way, in terms of how government has shaped the funding tariffs, they're totally chaotic and lack rhyme or reason for why they are the way they are and why they're so different between the different cohorts. But nonetheless, I think it is in existence. I don't know whether it needs updating, probably with the decline in the Ukrainian grant, which is going from 10,000 to about 5,000 for new arrivals. But other than that, I think we could share it, and I think it's in the public domain anyway.
That's good. Was to the cost in administering schemes on behalf of the government, like the financial schemes.
Thank you, Councillor Turner.
Yeah, I can come in here and Simon can follow. So some of the cohorts are funded naturally. The county council is the accountable body, and we have to make returns to them, and they need to make returns to the government. Some of the other cohorts, we are the accountable body, and Simon has to sign his life away in terms of financial returns to the government. So everything is audited and reportable back to the Home Office and feeds into their
Thank you. That answers
staff.
my question. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that.
Can I just come back on the business rate schemes you mentioned? Because on all of those, basically government tended to give the money that we would pay out up front. So it did it on an estimate basis. So on some of those schemes, they gave us too much, on some of them, they gave us too little. But for on all of them, we've had to go through a thorough reconciliation process on each of those schemes that comes to a final determination on how much we either owe them or they owe us, and we settle up. And we've had to do that for every scheme.
That includes officer time.
In terms of officer time, what they did is they reimbursed, they calculated a new burdens grant funding. So they use a formula to determine how much they would pay council. There's no negotiation over that. But actually, we found that it did cover our costs, the funding we received.
Thank you very much, Simon.
Thank you. Councillor Barlow, then Councillor Robb.
Thank you. Simon, you spoke about the importance of the Treasury income to us. And since the last scrutiny meeting, we've talked about where that income comes from. We raised that in the last meeting. And I wondered if you could update us on the progress so that we can look at how we jointly share the tension of the corporate plan, the declaration of climate and ecological emergency, and what we deposit our money in that leads to income which supports us fulfilment of those.
This was covered or discussed at Joint Audit and Governance Committee when the Treasury Management Strategy came forward. Treasury Management Strategy, just to clarify, it effectively spells out where we can place our money. We don't have to put money everywhere that's allocated in the strategy, but it's written in such a way that it gives us plenty of options to where to put our money for best use. Two things were discussed in particular at that committee meeting. One was the adoption of the ESG strategy or the ESG statement in the policy, and we discussed particularly that for us that's quite aspirational, but actually it is still governed primarily by all the regulation that surrounds Treasury management, which is the requirement to put in terms of making investment decisions, security, liquidity, and yield in that order is the priority, and so we need to look at ESG considerations as an overlay on top of that going forward. The other thing we've committed to do with our Treasury advisors is look at our existing funds, see how they, are they fulfilling what we need? Are there issues with them? Are there better places to put them? Are there more places to put them? We're committed to do that with link support over the coming months.
Thank you. Councillor Robb?
Yes, very quick one. Page 23, Appendix A4, Essential Growth Management, additional head of service. Yes, tell me all about this additional head of service.
Maggie.
Yes, so the community head of service, that is. So Tim here has a very vast area that he looks after, and as we'll discuss a little bit later on in the growth of communities, I think him as head of policy and programs, and indeed Jane Bolton in her role as well. They have just grown. We have the community hub, active communities, we've got the cornerstone, and various others. And so it's really to ensure that we have enough capacity to deliver the action plan that we'll later discuss. And also just to recognise that our work in the area of thriving communities has increased over time, and that has become more important. Yeah, and the hub is a permanent fixture.
Okay, thank you for that. I have to take a couple more questions. Any other? Councillor Barlow, and then one more
as well, right?
Okay, yours.
On page 32, there's the capital programme for the current corporate plan. I just wanted to check my understanding. At the bottom, it shows the corporate plan priority themes and the what I imagine is the capital programme by line. So, for example, it looks like there's 11.7 million for homes and infrastructure, theme 5 down to 112,000 for priority 1, the protect and restore our natural world. I just wanted to check, is that how I'm meant to understand that those are themes in our plan have got a vast disparity in the way that we fund them?
And just to say that, I think this is a new view. We haven't seen this.
It's very helpful to see, yeah.
And, we'd welcome Scrutiny's views on it. As you can see from the following table, the number in the column on the left is where each scheme has been assigned, and it's just been summed up there. Now that's, relatively crude because a scheme could deliver value across multiple branches in the corporate plan, but it's been assigned to one just for that purposes of doing.
I'll just back that up. I mean, when we gathered the information for this, we asked heads of service to, if you like, identify the primary corporate plan objective the project served. That of itself is subjective, but also it doesn't mean that that is only serving that corporate objective. It could serve 2, 3, 4 of them, but it was also just designed to be illustrative. I think it's something that, in terms of presenting capital programs, is a best practice idea. It's the first year we've tried it. It's subject to refinement, clearly, but I think it's certainly there as a helpful indicator for members and public.
Yeah, it's very helpful to see the difference in orders of magnitude. So thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Rowan.
Just say that is just capital. So if we look at protecting, restore and natural world, we could actually be spending a lot more on revenue. We haven't allocated the revenue budget in the same way. So it wouldn't be right to say that's how we split our money. That's how we split our capital expenditure, but not on year-on-year revenue.
Yeah, thanks for the clarification. Any final question? Councillor Morgan, the floor is yours.
Just a point, in terms of the response to the public participation, I'll be very keen to see that myself. So if we could publish that with the minutes, that'd be very keen to read that.
Yeah, absolutely. That merits a detailed response. But just as a general point, the way that public finances work is quite different to. I mean, I find it difficult to understand as well. Coming from the private sector, you normally wouldn't have a figure in a budget unless there was a huge amount of detail behind it. You've done all sorts of procurement and so on. You've made decisions about locations and all that sort of stuff. That's not the case with these budgets. These are indicators that allow all that detailed work to start. And so people often look at these numbers and think there must be all sorts of detail behind that and all sorts of decisions which have already been made in secret. We haven't been told. That's not the case. Not the case.
Councillor Barker, if you do have any data, then please do circulate. Thank you for that. Thank you for all those questions. I'm now going to debate about the report that you've seen and comments that you've heard. So anybody want to debate the recommendation that we have? I see none. The recommendation is stated in the agenda papers is that Scrutiny Committee considers the report of the Head of Finance on the Revenue Budget 2024-25 and Capital Programme 2024-25 to 2028-29 and make any recommendations to Cabinet. Obviously, there's been a lot of comments and a lot of questions that's gone back and forth. I'm hoping that Councillor Barker has made a note of those. Obviously, Candida has, and the comments from the committee are noted, and any changes when it goes to committee Cabinet is noted, and any changes are made. Is there any other comments that the committee want to make or want to highlight other than what's already been stated?
I think we noted our concern about flop mission creep, but otherwise that's fine.
I remember that one.
I think that's been noted by Councillor Barker and other Cabinet members. Unless I see anything else, I'm going to propose that we go with the recommendation that's stated in the agenda papers. I propose that we have a seconder. Councillor Turner, all in favour, just to note what we've said, and then for the Cabinet members to listen to what's been mentioned in this committee. Thank you, Councillor Barker and Councillor Rowan, for that, and also Simon Hewings, Head of Finance. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, we now go on to the next item on our agenda, which is agenda 8, which is Corporate Plan 2024-28, to agree an approach to the new corporate plan, and that's on pages 11 to 29. And we've got Councillor Andrea Powell, who's a Cabinet member, And we also got Tim Oray, who's head of policy and programs. So would like to introduce the report, please.
Right, yes, thank you. Good evening, everybody. And I hope you still have some energy left after that very detailed discussion about the budget paper. But of course, it's entirely appropriate that we are considering, or that you're considering, the corporate plan alongside the budget, since in many ways they're really two sides of the same coin. Any programme of activity must be appropriately financed and resourced, and the budget must reflect our delivery aspirations for our residents, covering both statutory and discretionary activities. Paragraph 5 of the paper before you reflects this. I quote, "For the corporate plan to be a credible strategic framework, it can be aspirational and ambitious, but it must be affordable and able to be appropriately budgeted for." And due to our longer term financial uncertainties, which we've just heard something about, that ensured, because of that uncertainty, we do need to retain flexibility and agility in our tactical approach to reaching our strategic goals. The corporate plan belongs to us all, members and officers alike, and it defines the strategic framework within which all of our service teams operate and compose their annual delivery plans. It provides what we call the golden thread that ensures that we are both coherent and transparent as a council, and gives our service delivery teams the confidence that their work aligns with the priorities that we have set with and communicated to our communities. It is vital, therefore, that the engagement includes staff as well as residents and local community groups. 4 years ago, we were only able to carry out virtual engagement. But even so, we had the highest number of responses ever received to a corporate plan engagement project. This time, we plan a blend of digital and in-person activities, going out to meet people where they are and aiming to become more of a council in the community. Paragraph 18 of the paper gives some examples of these planned activities. We are encouraging members to take on some of this engagement alongside our professional teams at the council. Today, Scrutiny is considering this approach, plan for public engagement and outreach for our next 4-year plan, which, as we've heard, we aim to, have you seen at the timetable in the document, we aim to adopt this in October, so halfway through the next financial year. And alongside that approach for the outreach and engagement, we have circulated the high-level definition of the 5 proposed strategic themes and some example projects within each one. These are not exhaustive, but can be used as discussion points and to illustrate how some of our programmes of work are continuations of things already underway, while others are brand new. There is a strong sense of continuity between the current plan and the proposed new one. While there are some new aspects, such as the more strategic approach and the integration of the climate and nature recovery themes. A few words on the proposed themes and how we will report on delivery. This time we're proposing 5 themes, having combined climate and nature recovery action after discussion with officers, and in fact on the recommendation of officers and the chair of SEAC. This very much reflects the current focus on climate change adaptation and mitigation and the role of the natural environment to help in improving our resilience. The second theme on openness and transparency has evolved into inclusion, accessibility and accountability, with a strong focus on reaching out to lesser heard groups in our communities. Our third proposed theme is thriving and healthy communities, which incorporates our response to the cost of living crisis, post-COVID recovery, and tackling inequalities in our district. Theme 4 outlines our approach to housing and infrastructure across the district, and Theme 5 describes the constant need to remain financially sustainable, responsible, and cost-effective. Critical to any plan is how we will monitor and measure our success. At this stage in the process, we cannot identify specific metrics because we haven't yet defined our priority projects. However, we will ensure that we have appropriate strategic targets, for example, around housing delivery, as well as the project-specific measures that will feature in annual service delivery plans. As we do currently, we will report on progress both quarterly and annually, and we will continue to improve the data hub so that residents can interrogate our operational performance statistics whenever they want to. In fact, we can plan to include questions on metrics and reporting as part of the public engagement. So that's enough from me. You have the three components of the paper in front of you, and I'm very happy to hear your comments and take your questions.
Thank you, Councillor Powell, for introducing that report and giving the context. Tim, would you like to add anything before I go to questions?
No, nothing to add. Very, very well put. Ready for question.
Okay, thank you. Committee members, I already see hands up. So, Councillor Gregory, Councillor Keith-Rohan, and then Councillor Robb.
Well, thank you. Thanks, Andrea. I agree with all the themes. I think they're really good, a really good basis to build on. I have got a couple of questions, but I'll start with one. On the theme 3, thriving and healthy communities, we talk about ensuring equitable access to leisure facilities. So pre-COVID, a lot of our leisure centres had creches, which I know a lot of mums especially relied on to, for their mental health and to get out and exercise. I was just wondering if that's the kind of thing that we would invest in, or I know obviously we don't manage our own leisure centres, but is there a way that we can potentially bring that back? Because I know that a lot of communities have really suffered because of that.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds very much like the sort of thing that we would want to ask in our consultation. It's an engagement process really, and to go and talk to those groups and find out if it is genuinely a barrier, because I completely appreciate that it would be. Obviously, we work with an outsourced contractor, so we'd have to engage with them in that exercise. I don't. Has this come up? Is this something that?
Yes, by Kate, and I am very, very sympathetic. I think it's certainly a very good idea to urge communities to respond, and if that is a barrier, then absolutely we'll explore how we can remove it. I think the difficulty is that the numbers in terms of usage just didn't bear that out, and I think that's why there has been reluctance by our external provider to kind of revive it. But nonetheless, I think it's something that we should certainly be looking at. As I'm very sympathetic to those who have carrying responsibility because it is so hard.
Okay, thank you. Do you want to go to your second question?
Yes, go on then.
I just want to remind councillors, if you can, when you do a question, you can refer to the page number or the paragraph.
Oh, sorry.
That will really help.
So page 18, same page, where we're talking about homes and infrastructure. And again, I don't know whether this is for the consultation or something to consider, but with our housing delivery strategy and action plan, whether we would consider, obviously we're delivering affordable homes, but whether we would consider working or looking to enter the private sector the private rental market that I know a number of other councils do, or at least one definitely, that use it obviously to keep private rental standards up, but also use it as a revenue generator.
So just to be sure I understand, do you mean working with private sector rental landlords to provide or building homes?
Being a private landlord.
Being a private landlord.
Yeah.
Well, the housing delivery strategy that we have now adopted is very flexible and gives us opportunities to use our own reserves, for example, to build homes, or to work with community land trusts, as you know, such as in town, or other registered providers, in order to be able to deliver more affordable homes to the market. I think it's been created deliberately to give us that flexibility, so we could. And the discussion we've just had about reserves, I think that's that could be something that we might want to. We say, well, that would be a legitimate and sensible, worthy use of resources to build our own homes for rent. So the answer is that the policy gives us that flexibility. Yeah.
Okay, great.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Keith-Ryan.
Yeah, I just want to come back to a matter we raised when we had an informal discussion about this at the weekend. We pointed to the fact that we're talking about the themes here. What we don't have and need to work towards is the way we're going to introduce it, the overall vision thing, because there is going to have to be quite a progression in one sense, because this original corporate plan that started out as looking to the future and all the rest of it, and then a whole series of disasters suddenly unfolded. Nobody expected COVID. We didn't expect to go into this with an absolutely appalling crunch on standards of living of people. Not just the cost of living and all the unexpected things that led to that, but the systematic winding down of public services by the current government. So we have to acknowledge all these extra problems, I think, somehow in this. I've had a horrible feeling there's quite a few more coming down the line. And so we do need an architecture for this, but it's a question of how we express ourselves optimistically, while at the same time being realistic about how we could get clocked again.
Okay.
That's not a very coherent question, but
that was a statement, and hopefully Councillor Powell can pick up the nuggets.
I picked out the nuggets, yes, and I think the point is that what we're looking at here, if you like, is sort of the heart of the plan, the themes and the projects. But actually, of course, when we publish a plan and adopt a plan, it will have that preamble, that introduction, that context. If we look back at the current local plan, current corporate plan, it has that. It puts the themes into that context. Of course, we don't want to have written that before we go out to talk to people. So I think many people and many members of the administration, certainly, and others, I'm sure, are thinking about what might go into that overarching vision and context. We will be using these months now over the engagement process and beyond to start finessing that and to really capture the essence of it and capture the personality of this administration and our aspirations for the future. But as we said at the outset, recognising that stuff happens and we need to retain.
Well, yeah, quite. But I think that somehow that sort of realisation has to be fed into the way you shape the consultation.
Yeah, or we can. I suspect that if we'll hear that from the council, from the engagement. We wouldn't want to be putting words into people's mouths.
I think the fundamental part, and hopefully Councillor Keats Ryan, I've sort of understood. I think the key part for this is going to be how you publicise, how you communicate with the community. And as you said, I don't think we should ever try and put words in the community's mouth, but we do need to get the themes out there and communicate in a way that not only do they engage but understand. I think that's what we need to get across. And all the other things that you pointed out, I obviously share your concerns, but I'm sure Councillor Powell and Tim will take on board. It's the communication that's key.
I can make one further comment on that, Chair. It's just that the communication and the engagement exercise will clearly be building on the work that's currently taking place for the joint local plan. And I think the tactics and techniques and tools that are being used in that process will really help to tease out some of those issues. And we want to see strategic alignment. We want to see continuity between these different pieces of strategic a strategic framework. So we'll be building on that experience.
Councillor Keats Ryan, any other questions?
No, I haven't got another question on.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Robb and then Councillor Rawlings.
Thank you, Chair. Just to echo Councillor Keats Rowland's comments about, I think this is a great plan. I very much like the themes. What we need is an overarching vision, a statement of our values that will crystallise the values that underpin these themes. So I think that's very important because that sort of filters through into the work that everybody does, and every organisation needs to have. And Moki, you're a communicator and a marketeer. You need to have a vision and values for how your organisation works and for what you're trying to achieve. So I think that's really vital. I've actually drafted one. I won't read it out tonight. But some of the key issues that I think need to come through in this, and I think we can all agree, it would be issues around fairness, issues around, for example, the well-being of future generations. I'm not seeing that in this particular plan, but I would very much like to see future generations considered. One thing that's not coming up in this, and I think given that we have major contracts that are being renegotiated in the foreseeable future, we need to have something about procurement and Councillor Barlow's raised this as regards scrutiny. We need to have some reflection of our values around procurement embedded in this corporate plan, so that when we're implementing this and we're procuring services, we are doing so in a way that's in line with our values. Engagement is obviously a key issue in this. And I think given that we have mention of resilience in this, we will all remember during COVID, those of us who were here at the time, that officers reached out to us as members and asked us to go into our communities and find out who was doing work around COVID, where were the mutual aid groups, where were the food hub banks, what was going on. We need to be, just in terms of building resilience, we need to have a really deep engagement process that's going to yield us a really solid database of organisations that are working in our community. Because going forward, I don't think COVID will necessarily re-emerge in the way it had done previously, but I think we can fully expect to see further shocks and further challenges ahead. And I think as a council, it's very important that we have access to community groups and that we're able to pivot very quickly. And I think the engagement process is going to be part of, ensuring that we build that database and that knowledge.
So I can comment. 100% agree. When we go through the engagement, of course, we have many different teams within the council who have their own network. So economic development, the community hub clearly has a growing and good database of the organisations, the grants team. I mean, all of those. So we have a fabulous comms and engagement team on the council, but we have those other channels to different user groups and different resident groups in our communities, and we have our members. And I think this is it is absolutely essential that we maintain those links and keep those. This is why we talk about being a council in the community. It's not a case of here's our, this is us, come and pass our threshold if you dare. We really want to go out there and talk to various groups. I don't know, Tim, if you want to comment on that.
Nothing I want to add, but just to say yes, in terms of we've got the existing databases, but then we've got those other things that we can also tap into as well.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Rawlings, then Councillor Morgan.
Thank you, Chair. So yeah, very much support the 5 themes. I think it's right to merge the 2 climate and nature ones together, because I think they just are so interlinked that it's the right way to approach the problem. I think it's positive to see the increased focus on the engagement and inclusion for the community. I think it's really important that we're transparent in communicating and engaging with our communities, and it's not just the formal bodies who are important, very important, but also all those other groups to actually make sure that we're reaching all the communities. So I think that's really good. Thriving communities, absolutely. And the financial stability stuff, and support the innovative engagement. If there's a challenge, I like the stuff about the homes and infrastructure that meet local needs, and the stuff about delivery of appropriate housing, and secure and appropriate housing mix, which we know we haven't been doing. I would say it's delivery under the current local plan as well as the new one as projects. And I know at the end of the first sort of paragraph there, it talks about a particular focus on fair distribution and equality of access, but that's only talking about infrastructure. And actually, homes are extraordinarily important to people.
And access to nature.
Yes, indeed. But under that particular one, being homes and infrastructure that meet local needs, and yes, there's green infrastructure as well as.
Councillor Rawlings, I agree with everything you've said so far. Can we?
No. So my challenge here is that we make clear that fair distribution applies to homes as well as infrastructure, and that in terms of the appropriate housing mix, that it applies in compliance to our existing plan, which we haven't been doing.
Okay.
Thank you.
Again, Councillor Rawlings, I agree with everything you said. Councillor Powell, do you want to add anything to that?
So do I. I think what I would suggest is that kind of concept of fairness and tackling inequality within our district is something that we